Welcome back, everyone, to the Spin Move iRacing Network. We have the Daytona 500 race recap show here. Lots to discuss, lots to go over. Excited to get into it here with my best friend Zach, and we are here on Drafting Buddies. Zach, excited to talk about the Daytona 500 here with you. As we mentioned previously, as you're seeing up on the screen, we have a couple of talking points. Those aren't strict guidelines, they're just things that Zach and I decided would make good topics of conversation to kind of lead our thoughts as we go through this discussion of the race we saw on Sunday night. Looking at our top 10, we have the rookie. Austin Cindric getting it done on Roger Penske's 85th birthday. How special is that to have a rookie win the biggest race of the year and on the team owner's birthday? It's just great. Um, Love to hear some of your thoughts on it, Zach. Maybe pick a driver off the top 10 that really surprised you or somebody that you wanted to see in the top 10 and it was a great feeling seeing them get there.
Yeah, it was quite an eventful race. We're going to talk about that here moving forward in the show, but there's a couple drivers over here that are definitely worth mentioning. I first have to think of Bubba Wallace, right? He won the last points paying race at Talladega, and that guy is a man on the mission at these restrictor plate tracks. I think, as polarizing as he is, NASCAR's got to come to grips with the fact that Bubba Wallace is a really good plate racer, and he's wise and he knows how to get up to the front at the end where it matters. He was up front a little bit in stage one, kind of flirting with the top 10, but then you really didn't see a lot from Bubba until about 25 to go when he took the lead and started dominating there towards the end. Another name that I really want to draw our attention to is eighth place. Freaking David Reagan in a Rick Ware racing car. That guy dodged two, three accidents. I know he dodged two big ones, like a pro going through the final stages of the race. And we talked about it. Guys like him, and strangely enough, the guy that finished in front of him, Michael McDowell, they're very patient and they put themselves in positions to overcome and to really succeed. So shout out to David Rakin there on a one-off with Rick Ware Racing, former Daytona 500 champ, getting it done, finishing eighth.
Absolutely. Good to see some of those guys that kept their cars clean for the Daytona 500 find their way into the top 10. But as we look at this top 10, take a look at the ninth position. We have Brad Keselowski. Brad, the bad man, as we have put up here, involved in two of the major big ones that happened here at the Daytona 500. Let's talk a little bit about what happened. Brad Keselowski behind another car for both incidents. It happened basically the same way, two different spots on the track, but they were relatively the same in how it happened. Brad just being what was overly aggressive, as Denny Hamlin had commented earlier on a couple of news stories about that.
And Ricky Stenhouse
And
too, right? So
Ricky
Ricky,
Stenhouse calling him out.
if Ricky Stenhouse says you're being overly aggressive, you're being overly aggressive. I just had to say that.
Absolutely. And using the bumper, using that big old chrome horn to, try to shove a car out there. It is Daytona. We're getting into that bump draft, trying to get these cars to go faster. And not 100% sure what was going through Brad's mind, but for sure the car in front of him was loose, and it definitely looked like they weren't having a good time with that bump draft. First incident coming out of turn two, second incident coming out of turn four. I know I mentioned it talking to you during the race. We were messaging back and forth. it looked like those guys got dumped. What are your thoughts on it, Zach?
Yeah, so really, we saw a lot of. It was kind of a resurgence of what was like 2011 or 2013 drafting package where tandem drafting wasn't exclusively how you got around the racetrack, but there were some points where tandem drafting really took effect. And it didn't take long for the field to figure out that the Fords had it made with tandem drafting. It had something to do with how those bumpers locked onto one another. You never saw Chevy do that with their pointed front end. Toyota was able to do that every now and again towards the end of the race, but ultimately, I think one of the most aggressive pushers of the day and one of the best pushers of the day was Keselowski. And so when a driver does that early and often, they gather confidence. And he was reported on the radio saying, after especially the Harrison Burton flip, I don't understand why he wrecked. I didn't hit him in a bad spot. And that might just be Keselowski trying to cover himself. But really, it's... I don't have a lot of great things to say about Keselowski, even as fired up as I was about him winning the duel and Roush being back. And he was bound and determined, as Ricky Stenhouse said in an interview, to wreck the whole field until he won. And Brad Kay didn't make a lot of friends.
He certainly did not make a lot of friends. I'm glad you brought it up. I had almost forgotten about it, but Harrison Burton, one of the big ones, winding up all the way over onto his roof. Somehow, might even have to attribute it to the design of the car. I did see all of those flaps coming up as they're designed to do when the car starts to spin or get airborne, helping bring that car back down on all four wheels. Climbed out of the car perfectly fine from what it looked like, got checked out at the infield care center and was released. So always a great thing to see a driver get out of the vehicle on their own power, especially after a huge hit at Daytona like we saw there. But the big one, I would have to say, as we've put up here, it was the big ones. The Harrison Burton accident. There were multiple cautions that similar places on the track coming out of turns 2, coming out of turns 4. A couple of places I believe that the drivers just didn't give each other quite enough room and ended up getting into each other up near the front of the field. And then you watched it trickle all the way back through. What are your thoughts, Zach? Do you think these drivers were being too aggressive, especially considering that they have all these new parts and new cars and they really don't have a whole lot of access to pieces? Or do you think that this was a regular Daytona 500 and this is just kind of the super speedway racing we're used to seeing?
Yeah, I really think that it 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 speaks to the driver fortitude, right? Like we talked about in the pre-race show, that we kind of expected a train to happen, and after the Harrison Burton wreck, it did kind of fizzle out there, and a train happened, but didn't happen for the whole race. Um, and there were points where it was one line, but that didn't stay that way. The drivers were able to be aggressive and make moves and really put their best foot out there to be what Daytona 500 champions. I think, however, what was really telling was the addition of Tony Stewart in the booth on the Fox broadcast. He's an owner, right? And towards the end of the race, like Tony Stewart already has a rep of hating restrictor plate races because you work on these cars forever just to destroy them. And we got to see that from an owner's perspective, the frustration of going, man, like my drivers played it safe. I mean, you look up here, you have Briscoe, excuse me, you have Briscoe and Almirola. I know Kevin Harvick was up there towards the end, and he got caught up in a wreck. And yet, after all of that, I think only one SHR car got home relatively unscathed. And that is really frustrating. I think these drivers on this part shortage need to understand that, Hey, I got to do my team a solid. And we saw multiple big ones. I think Brad Keselowski's got a lot to answer for. I was surprised because he's a team owner now, right? He just didn't care. And yeah, I think it's a case of being overly aggressive and just not being aware of. Like, drivers are still going to race. It's just, I think it's really kind of foolish to tear up over half the field.
Absolutely. And 40 cars started this race. Coming to the checkered flag, 27. 27 cars making it to the checkered flag. That's taking out 13 cars that were unable to finish the race. And as we already mentioned, some of those cars were coming to the line damaged. So either way, a lot of work for these teams, a lot of parts that needed to be replaced. And that leads us into our next little topic here of wheels literally falling off of these vehicles, racing so hard and doing everything you can. And then I believe it was Kaz Grala's team that was the first to experience this. Wheel just wasn't tight enough on the car and ended up coming off. Do you think this is a problem that we will see going forward? As they explained on the broadcast, it has to do with those pins behind the hub itself lining up with the wheel? Or do you think this is just something that the teams learned from the Daytona 500 and are going to carry forward so that it doesn't happen again?
Well, speaking about falling off a wheel, I think you're starting to fall off the wheel that we have here on Drafting Buddies. So if you can, if there you go, there you go. All right. So I waited the whole show for that transition. You're the point guy this week, so I got to get a transition in. But uh, regardless, the pins behind. Yeah, the pins that needed to line up in terms of them locking in the wheel, that was a big topic of conversation. I think pit crew members um, are at fault. And some point we saw uh, a pit stop earlier in the race where the tire changer came around, and on these old tires where you had multiple lugs to undo, they said on the broadcast with the air guns that they have, you can preemptively start that and have the device rotating in order to take that off. You can't do that with these single lug tires, and that ruins a pit stop. And so lots of adjustments need to be made, especially with the single lug that and the disaster that happened as the wheel exploded on I don't I know Kaz Grala had a pit road issue. I don't remember who had a wheel explode. Um, was that might have been Briscoe, the 14 machine.
I believe it was Briscoe. It sounds familiar,
Yeah.
but I don't want to say for certain that it was.
Regardless, a wheel exploded and it shouldn't have. Like, literally the the new rim that these guys talked up broke apart. Uh, and I think that had something to do with it's almost like putting a nut on a bolt, right? If you don't get the threads lined up right, it's going to go on crooked and it's not going to stay on. Like, you can definitely get the nut on there, it's just not going to be functional. And I think that's what these single lugs are going to boil down to, where these crews were so used to going, okay, if I get 3 out of 5, or if I get 80% of the lugs on perfectly, the tire's going to stay on. And I only have to get 100% at the last pit stop when NASCAR inspects my car. And the reality is you can't do that anymore. It has to be perfect every time, or you're going to have parts failures. Lots of guys having right front issues with the tires and making sure that the crews are doing their jobs.
Absolutely. And, to the same point of this really being on those pit crews, I believe it was Ryan Blaney's team that come the end of stage one, or maybe it was stage two, had issues getting the tire back off of the car after he made that stop. Several issues reported with refueling on a couple of the machines with the way the new nozzles line up, and then NASCAR making changes to the actual can itself to slow down that fuel flow. Drivers actually having to wait even after the jack is let down, and that's usually the sign for these drivers to start flying off pit road. Hey man, we don't have all the fuel in it yet. Wait for my radio call. So definitely some interesting things we saw here. Final thoughts, Zach. What are you thinking? And then possibly something you're looking forward to.
Yeah, I think this was a big learning experience for a lot of teams. I'm very curious that as we transitioned into a little bit more like normal racing, are we going to see these smaller teams come up to the front? A big topic of conversation towards the end of the race was like JTG Doherty's one car team with Ricky Stenhouse, and he's taking on the world, and that's what this car's built for. That already happened at Daytona. Like, that's not new. Heck, Michael McDowell won last year. Like, that's not new. The real test for this car will be when we get to mile and a half tracks, when we get to road courses. Is driver talent going to reign supreme when it comes to uh, getting those guys, those smaller funded teams, up front? Everybody has equal stuff. Um, that's really what I'm curious for. David, I know that we've talked about. Excuse me. I know we've talked about this in the past for drafting buddies, and I forgot to put it up there. But what we'll have for you guys on our post race content is literally a graphic that's gonna say draft or pass, and that's kind of our rating system. If this is a worthwhile race, like, did we witness on the racetrack something we want to work with or something that we want to pass up? And next week we'll have a graphic up here for you guys, and it'll look cool and whatever. But uh, David, I think I'm going to draft with this. I think that the Daytona 500 was a really good race. You saw a little bit of everything. It wasn't the train we were all thinking of. I really would have liked to see more cars make it to the finish line, but uh, great storyline with Austin Cindric as a rookie winning the Daytona 500. Not the rookie I picked, Harrison Burton, to win the 500, but regardless. Oh yeah, and by the way, we went 0 for 1 in picks as a team. So, and 0 and 1 as competitors. So I guess it doesn't matter. We just shouldn't pick because nearly all of our drivers uh, were just slaughtered here at this race. But what about you? Are you gonna work with this? Is this a race that you would love to see again, that you're willing to work with? Or are you gonna pass it up because you think there's something better out there? And then your final thoughts.
You know, Zach, looking at this race, I know there was a ton of excitement between us as we were messaging, especially as we wound down towards those final laps. I'm going to have to give this one a draft. For sure, there was some great racing on the track, seeing a ton of different outcomes just really playing themselves out, especially as we got down to those final 20 or so laps. Really, hey, this guy's up near the front. You know, what can he do? Is the entire conversation we were having. Final thoughts. I think teams and drivers still have a lot to figure out with these new cars. As we saw some of these parts failures kind of rearing their heads yet again. Saw a little bit of it in the Coliseum, now seeing a little bit of it here at Daytona. I think as the season goes on, we're going to really figure out this new car and see what it can do. And then I think we're also going to see what drivers can do. I really do expect that this style of racing, this car will lead to those group kind of teams falling a little bit more to the wayside and those single car teams really getting their chance to shine in this new vehicle.
I'll tell you a guy who's got it figured out. Just a quick aside before you send us off is your boy Martin Truex Jr. I would digress if we didn't just happen to mention that MTJ swept both stage 1 and stage 2 of the 500. Couldn't get it done late, but he got those stage points.
For sure, and definitely not a super speedway driver on a normal basis. So I was super excited to see that. Glad that you mentioned it. Um, Great to see. But as you mentioned, we are on our way with this show here. Great to hear your thoughts, Zach. Um, Great to have you guys here, our fans. If you're interested in our content, please like and subscribe to our YouTube channel here. Everything that we are doing now is set up for future shows. If you are interested or know somebody that's interested, you can find our website link in the other videos. We'll put it on our YouTube channel as well. And for now, just remember, drafting buddies Zach and David are here to always keep racing.